This handheld is getting close to being out for a year, but recently I've seen a ton of people talking about it and buying it, and it really piqued my interest because when it first came out there wasn't a lot of buzz for it, but now as time has gone on, more people are finding out about it, discussing it. It's getting even better as time goes on with updates and everything else. So recently I bought one for myself because I just couldn't resist and I had to try it out for myself. So this handheld is the Trimui Smart Pro. So in this video I'm going to be showcasing what the Trimui Smart Pro can do, why it's so special, and we're going to get to the bottom why it's just getting more and more popular as time goes on. So getting it out of the box, we can see it doesn't come with a whole lot. We have this little sheet here which gives you some information about the handheld. Then we have the handheld itself, and under that we have our charger, and really that's it. So now getting the handheld out of its little bag, I'll just say when I unboxed this and got to hold it in my hands for the first time, I was genuinely blown away by how good it felt. And I'm not just saying that for sake of seeming dramatic in the video or something. It really was surprising to me. Maybe it's the weight, maybe it's the large 5-inch 720p screen. I don't know what it was. It has good build quality, but it just feels so nice. I think a big factor in this was the price. So I'll have a link down below in the description. So if you decide to buy this or just want to check it out, see if it's on sale, anything like that, down in the description. But on Aliexpress, you can regularly find this handheld for $55, maybe $60. So it has come down in price from what it originally was. And if you watch some older reviews, they gave you much higher prices than you can find it now. So that's even not a sale price. I've seen some people that have gotten this handheld for below $50 during some of the Aliexpress sales that go on so many times throughout the year. So you can always check that out down in the description. Again, I'll put an affiliate link down there. So if you buy it through that link, it really supports the channel. So if you do buy it, I'd appreciate it if you use my link. It really helps the channel out. But all this to say, for the price, the quality of this handheld is just insane. It really is. And I think people are starting to find out about that. Compared to other handhelds in this price range, they just don't come close to how this device looks and feels for the most part. So taking a quick look at the handheld, starting with the obvious, we have a very prominent 16:9 5-inch 720p screen. So this thing just looks great. Even before turning it on, it looks great. And we have our A, B, X, Y buttons, and they are a little bit clicky, but I actually kind of like the way these feel. I've been pretty critical of other handhelds with some of the clicky buttons and D-pads. It can be done in a way that is pretty good, and I think it was actually done pretty well here. Again, on the left we have our D-pad, which is clicky. It's not as bad in my mind as other clicky D-pads that we've seen recently, like the RG35XX SP. Something about this D-pad is just more bearable to use in my opinion. I still don't love clicky D-pads most of the time, but I actually kind of like this one and I find it really easy to use. There's going to be more on that later. Then down below we have our two analog sticks, and these analog sticks have really been a sticking point for some people. They think they're too recessed into the handheld. They don't have enough range of motion, I suppose you could say, and I could say that is somewhat true. They are very small. You don't have a whole lot of room and a whole lot of control, but after a little bit of getting used to, again, there's going to be more on this later, I find them to be completely usable and aren't really that bad. Again, they're not my favorite, but I'm sure they were made like this to make this a more pocketable handheld, and I do find it to be very pocketable actually. So we have on the bottom then our start and select buttons. Those are on the right, which some people have criticized. I agree, it is a little bit confusing. I often want to press the select button instead of start, and the menu button, which is over here on the left, instead of select. So it can be a little bit annoying, but again, after some getting used to, I'm sure you'll be fine with it. And I believe this is done to look more like the PSP and the PS Vita. Now looking at the shoulder buttons and the triggers, you can see that they're stacked, which is usually a very sought after feature on these handhelds. Some people have been kind of critical of the triggers. At first, I wasn't super fond of them either. They're very small. I actually found it at the very beginning kind of actually hard to press them in, not just like it was a little awkward. Sometimes I would try to press them and I couldn't. I don't know if I just got used to it or they broke in after, I don't know, maybe like an hour of playing it, but I have no issue with them whatsoever. So I actually don't hate them as much as other reviewers do. Maybe there was an update and they manufactured them a little bit different than they used to, but I actually find them okay and perfectly usable. So if you've heard other reviewers criticize them, mine I actually find to be pretty decent. And another thing is I imagine the reason for making them so small was that it makes the handheld more pocketable and they barely stick out at all. So these are also a little bit clicky, but still feel pretty nice overall. And then up top we have our power button, a USB-C host port, so this isn't going to be the one for charging. And then we have our volume buttons, and looking at the bottom we have our function switch, which I'll talk about more in a second, and then our USB-C charging port, a microphone, which I'm not sure if it actually works or not, but there is a microphone there apparently, a micro SD card port, we only have one on this handheld, and then a 3.5mm headphone jack. And that's all that's on this handheld. There's nothing on the sides or anything like that. So now that we have all this, let's finally turn it on and take a look at it. So turning it on, we have our Trimui operating system, which is actually pretty unique, and you don't really see a whole lot of stuff like this on other handhelds, but I actually like it. At first, you might need to take a few minutes to understand what's going on, where everything is, but once you get a hang of it, I find it to be very usable and perfectly fine. So we have our different pages here. We have our favorites, which is where you can put your favorite games, pretty self-explanatory. We have recent, which is just going to show the recent games and apps you've been playing. We have best, which just has a few different collections. I found this to be a little weird. It just has 3 on mine. We have Vertical Arcade, some NES multi-cartridges, and then some Pokemon games here. So I guess they just wanted to give some games they thought might be more useful for you for this space. I'm not really sure exactly why they put them all here, but whatever. And then we have game, which is just going to be where all of your consoles are. You go in here, you can look through all the consoles. Then when you find the console you want to play, press A, you can look through your games, press A on the game you want to play, and then you'll be into your game. Pretty self-explanatory. Nothing different from any other handheld out there. And then we have our apps here. We have interesting things like now this supports Moonlight, and we have our function key settings over here. So I guess this is now a good time to mention that. What this basically is for this little switch on the bottom left of your handheld. You can actually see it highlighted up top. So a lot of people were really confused about this when it first came out. So basically what this is you can map certain functions to this little function key, and when you turn it on, it enables those functions. So for example, you can use the LED off section, which gets rid of the LEDs on the analog stick. So if you don't like those being on, you can toggle it by using the function key. So you can activate that if you want or deactivate it. So it can be really whatever you want. You can see all the different options you have here. One that's actually important is the CPU performance mode. I didn't do any emulation on this video using the CPU performance mode, so if you want to, you can toggle that through the function key and get a little bit better performance in all of your games using that. So if you ever find your game slowing down a little bit, stuttering, maybe having a little bit of slowdown here and there, you can try using the CPU performance mode and see if that fixes anything. Again, this was disabled in all the emulation you're going to see in this video, so if you see something on here that you want to be a little bit better, just know you could probably get a little bit of a performance increase using the CPU performance mode. And then we have net play in our settings. So now we have all of our settings here. We have display, volume, Wi-Fi, and this handheld does actually support Wi-Fi, which is nice. We have hotspot settings, which would be interesting to try out. There's Bluetooth, and apparently this handheld does now support Bluetooth audio. Then we have our themes. It only comes pre-installed with the default theme, so there's nothing you can change it to. We have our key maps. You can change it to things, for example, for Vertical Arcade, you could do that. And then we have our system. So in the system, we just have our different settings. We have our power off up here, so it's best to power it off through this setting here. And up top, you can actually use the power button if you want to put it in sleep mode, which is a very good sleep mode. It's really an actual sleep mode, which doesn't lose too much battery, which is actually kind of unique. A lot of handhelds in this price range do not have good sleep modes, and you'll drain your battery pretty fast. So you actually get a good sleep mode here, which is nice. Down here is the joystick calibration section. So if your analog sticks get a little bit messed up, and mine have had some issues and I've needed to calibrate it and probably still need to mess around with it a little more, you can do so down here. And down here in the device info, you can see all of your versions, and these are the versions I'm using right here. As far as I understand, the newer updates are actually a lot better and do bring new features like Vulkan support, which does give you the opportunity in certain consoles and certain games to increase the performance. So keep in mind they're still doing updates, and from what I can tell here, this version is superior to the former versions. So always check the software versions and everything else, because you can do updates yourself just through the micro SD card like any other handheld. So maybe in the future there will be even more updates and there'll be more features that I don't have yet in this video. So now let's actually take a look at the gaming. So let's first start off with the stuff that's easy. We have our lower end systems. We have stuff like the Game Boy Advance. We have consoles like SNES. All the stuff down below PlayStation 1 are going to work perfectly fine. You'll have no issues whatsoever with any of these, and they look amazing on the screen. I know some people aren't happy playing certain 3 to 4 or 4 to 3 consoles on a big 16 to 9 screen like we have here. They don't like the black bars on the side. This actually comes with bezels for most of these consoles. Some don't have them built in and automatically applied, but for a lot of them you do, and with those I think it actually looks really nice. And even if you don't like the black bars or the bezels on the side, you want it to fill out the entire screen, you could stretch it if you want, but that's kind of crazy and it won't look very good. I don't mind that stuff, but all of it aside, these kind of games look amazing on this screen. This screen just blows me away every time I use it. For like $55, $60, a screen like this is just unheard of. Nothing in this price range looks so good. Really, really it doesn't. Game Boy Advance on the screen just looks great. I normally don't rant and rave about screens like this. Usually I can just take it or leave it. They're usually just average, nothing too great, nothing too bad, but this screen is just so good. Game Boy Advance games look amazing on here. Other consoles like the SNES looks really great on here. PS1 looks good. Everything just looks amazing on this screen. I really just can't get enough of it and can't stop raving about how the screen is. And I think that's a big reason why people are just finding out about how great this handheld is. Maybe they thought it was only good for a 16:9 handheld like the PSP. Don't think it's only for the PSP. Everything below that looks great. And all the emulation up to PS1, even PS1 at a 2x resolution, works perfectly fine. You're not going to face any performance issues. This is powerful enough to handle all that emulation, again, up to the PS1. And then we have N64 and Dreamcast. So I would say most N64 games are going to be able to run well on here. Most Dreamcast games are going to be able to run well on here. For these consoles, you might find certain games that will give you small performance drops here and there. I won't say the Trimui Smart Pro is perfect for N64 and Dreamcast, but the vast majority of games are going to be playable here, so you might want to do some setting tweaks to improve the performance, but really, I didn't face anything significant at all when it comes to performance drops in Dreamcast and N64. I'm just not confident enough to say everything is perfect, because I'm sure with some of the higher end games, here and there, you will face some performance drops, so I wouldn't get this if you expect absolutely perfect performance on both of these consoles, but the performance is really good the vast majority of the time. And now what you've all been waiting for, we have PSP emulation. So I bought this handheld on a whim without watching too many reviews or anything, and I kind of had it in my mind that it has a nice looking 16:9 screen, it's big, but it can't really handle that much PSP because I'm used to a lot of other handhelds in this price range not being super great for PSP. And looking at the specs of the Trimui Smart Pro, it's pretty similar to a lot of other handhelds in this price range, so I was expecting the normal stuff. You know, you can play some PSP games, the lower end stuff, some mid-range stuff, but the higher end games aren't going to be great. But when I actually started testing out PSP performance, I was really pleasantly surprised with the Trimui Smart Pro. I was able to play the vast majority of PSP games on here. Sure, there's some really high-end games that might give you some trouble, like Midnight Club LA Remix, for example, had some performance issues, but playing other games like here in GTA, I didn't play this game extensively, but when I first started it out, it automatically had the setting set to a 2x resolution, so I had to lower that, and you might want to mess around with some of the frame skip settings, but you can get this game playing in a way that is actually good looking. You're not going to be facing any significant slowdowns. You might get an occasional stutter here and there, but for the most part, the game is completely playable. You can look at other harder to run games and just see that it actually works very well. So I was really pleasantly surprised with this handheld. And of course, the lower end stuff, the mid-range stuff is going to work well. Again, you might have to mess with some settings. Certain games can run at a 2x resolution. Others, you're going to have to bring it down to a 1x resolution. Some games can run without frame skip. Other ones, you should use some frame skip. You're going to need to mess around with that and some other settings here and there. So I would say with some small tweaks, this thing is really good for the PSP. And do I have to mention the 16:9 screen? I said it so many times, but PSP just looks really good on here in the native 16:9 aspect ratio. Looking at PSP and other handhelds in this price range, like the RG35XXH, it just comes nowhere near the Trimui Smart Pro. So it's already small on a 3.5-inch screen. We have 5-inch on our Trimui Smart Pro. In 4 to 3 devices, again, like the RG35XXH has, you're going to need to make it even smaller to be the right 16:9 ratio, and you're going to have these large black bars, and it's even small on that screen. So comparing them side by side, it's really no comparison. The Trimui Smart Pro is the clear winner for anything in this price range. If you want to do some PSP emulation, it just is so great looking. And also we have the opportunity with custom firmware, or I shouldn't really say custom firmware because it's really just modified versions of the stock OS. These options exist out there. I'm not going to be going into them in this video. I just want to cover the stock experience, but you should know on these other firmwares, you do have the ability to use Portmaster. With Portmaster, you'll probably want to play certain games that are at a 16:9 ratio, so they'll look great on here too. So there's just so many great benefits to having this nice 16:9 screen. So overall, I really love this handheld. Certainly there's some downsides. I would say one of them is the analog sticks. They're not super great. I'll admit that. They're okay, they're playable. I've had, like I said, some earlier issues with the left analog stick that required some calibration and some messing around with it, but I would say overall they're fine. Yes, I wish they had a little bit more of a range. It's a little bit easier than I'd like to go 0 to 100, so to speak. I prefer the increased controls that you might get on a handheld, like I mentioned earlier, the RG35XXH on the analog sticks, but these are completely usable, and if this is your main handheld, I think you'll get used to it really quickly and it won't be that much of an issue going forward. There's also the triggers, which again at the beginning I said I didn't like too, but I got used to them and I find them perfectly usable and I don't even dislike them anymore. Again, there's the controls. We have a clicky D-pad, so with this you're not going to be getting the accidental diagonals, and some people might think that it's a little bit harder to hit a diagonal on a clicky D-pad like this. There are some instances where maybe on a different D-pad it would be a little bit easier to hit a diagonal when you really want to really quickly, but I actually find for a clicky D-pad, the D-pad here to be pretty good, and then the buttons and the shoulders and the triggers in terms of their clickiness, I actually enjoy them. So with the controls, I find them to be good, and the analog sticks separately, I think they're fine. And one more thing, I have noticed that the Trimui Smart Pro does get a little bit warm sometimes, especially when you're playing PSP or Dreamcast or N64 or something like this that is a little more intensive. You can feel a warmth. It's nothing to be worried about. It's never gotten really hot or anything like that, but I have noticed it here, generally speaking, more than other handhelds. But all in all, with this handheld, I'm just super impressed with it. It's not just great because it's a good handheld, it's great along with a really cheap price tag. In my opinion, it makes the Trimui Smart Pro an amazing choice because I think this handheld would actually be a good value even if it costs like $85. There's a lot of other handhelds coming out around that price with shipping that are nowhere near what you get with the Trimui Smart Pro, to be honest, because this handheld comes in at about $55 to $60 on Aliexpress, so you should be paying after tax and shipping, as an American at least, around $60 or maybe like $62, $63, somewhere like that. But if you decide to find it on sale, I've seen people find them for less than $50, near $40. Again, you should be careful on Aliexpress when buying super cheap listings, especially from new sellers with no reviews, stuff like this. You should be careful because you don't want to get scammed. Sometimes they send you fake products, but from genuine, well-rated sellers on sale, I've seen people get this handheld on sale after all the AliExpress coupons and everything, get this handheld in the low 40s. Again, that's even an abnormal price, but that is just such a steal. If you decide to buy one, again, I'd really appreciate it if you use my link down in the description. It's an affiliate link. It comes at no extra cost to you, but it helps support the channel. So I'll have the link down below in the description. You can check the price out, see what it's at for you. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.